The Little Crush by EmyyWolf on DeviantArt. The following is a true story experienced by the author. All characters are still alive and kicking to this day. Posted on August 12, 2021. Recap. So the last time on Fat Tinkerbell Part 3, in the story of the creepy stalker, we talked about how Fat Tinkerbell didn't care if Harry Potter would mess with her schedule. That she started to like some of the schedule manipulation because she got to see the king of this job. The one who hired her. Also, she realized that Harry Potter was expecting Boss Battle to pick on her and torment her. However, it turned out that Boss Battle actually liked Fat Tinkerbell romantically. So Harry Potter was gonna end up looking stupid and lose that little petty fight against Fat Tinkerbell. And soon Fat Tinkerbell caught her manager RoboCop chasing her and following her all throughout the maze. Story 4. The Little Crush. So weeks would go on and Fat Tinkerbell would try to tolerate all of the weird things happening at this job. It appeared like Harry Potter wasn't paying much mind to Fat Tinkerbell anymore, but from seeing how much the RoboCop would follow her, she'd think there is still some sort of plan there. As the days went by, Fat Tinkerbell wouldn't really see much of the king. Fat Tinkerbell slowly began to lose some interest for the king. Instead, she was now beginning to crush on someone else. And y'all are not going to believe this, but Fat Tinkerbell now begins to crush on the legend himself. The fucking RoboCop! There is no knowing why exactly, but maybe it was all this new attention she was now getting from the RoboCop more than anyone in her life. Maybe it was the fact that the king was almost non-existent at that point. But on top of all of this, the RoboCop was the typical hot guy. The typical bad boy. The RoboCop is the type of guy that all girls chase after. The type of boy that all girls want. RoboCop would be considered a 10 in that job at the maze. He is young and he has his gains all over his arms and back. He is a unique type of character in a way, while also being the stereotypical F-boy of this maze. You could just tell. Just by seeing him and hearing him talk, you could just tell he had game. When Fat Tinkerbell first met RoboCop, she really was a bit impressed or intrigued by him. His personality is a lot like that of a strict soldier that takes everything too seriously and stands his ground. He has a deep voice that intimidates everyone. And his attitude and facial expression are more on the serious frown side. His personality is more of the "do not cross me or you'll see what's up" type. He looks like he came from the streets, and like he used to fight in the streets, while also looking like he came fresh out of the army, while also looking like he came fresh out of prison. With his serious attitude, his angry expressions, and his ghetto New Yorker accent, as well as his tattoos all over his fingers. Fat Tinkerbell had never met anyone with any of these characteristics and traits at all. Most humans in reality, in the normal realm, tend to be either kind, sympathetic, caring, understanding, etc. Most people showcase kindness and smile more. No New Yorker accent, no tattoos over their fingers, no serious militant attitude with their thick eyebrows. None of that. And we're talking about men here, dudes. Most of them are not like this. RoboCop, however, was unique in every sense of the word. Most humans also tend to be boring or in their own mind. Pretty much minding their own business. However, this man gave off an energy that felt exciting and interesting. He was a special kind of character. It was also very, very clear that he had game. He had all kinds of women chasing after him and all kinds of exes. It was beyond obvious that he had no trouble whatsoever getting a girl. Zero trouble. All the girls, which now included Fat Tinkerbell, would have the hots for this guy, precisely because of all these reasons. That uniqueness, that manliness, the deep voice, the fearlessness, the attitude, the fit body, the big veiny hands. All of that put together into one person. Oh man. Heart. Fat Tinkerbell would obviously believe that she would never have a chance with RoboCop, since he had all kinds of Barbies and princesses and pretty young things all around the maze selling cooking and all that. So she would just keep her distance. Little red Fat Tinkerbell was obese, she would be considered a 3 or a 2. So obviously she understood that a guy like RoboCop could never really be interested in someone like Fat Tinkerbell, even if Fat Tinkerbell had pretty eyes. RoboCop was getting 10s, why would he go for a 2? RoboCop was getting all kinds of girls. When Fat Tinkerbell began to crush on this boy, she started crushing bad. Fat Tinkerbell had never in her life, never in her past, crushed to that level. She had never had the hots for anyone like that before. She did kinda crush on a boy every now and then, during her school life. But nothing like this, and to that level. Fat Tinkerbell felt something different for RoboCop. What was it? Well, it was a sexual attraction beyond anything she'd ever felt for anyone in her entire life. An attraction beyond compare. Another fact to point out, while RoboCop truly was this young buck, he was in Fat Tinkerbell's age range, those raging 20s. While the king was more on the older mid-30s side. Fat Tinkerbell was 21 years old, but she had no clue how old RoboCop was. It seemed that he was in his 20s or mid-20s. Regardless, she was now completely hypnotized by this man. Heart. Fat Tinkerbell wasn't even attracted to the king like that, and to that degree. The king was more like this one handsome man with the looks and the money. But the RoboCop, well, the RoboCop on the other hand was this one sensual, college-age badass, fearless, jock boy. He had all kinds of muscles all around him. RoboCop's stare and deep serious voice would intimidate all men surrounding him and would melt any woman around. It was now clear who was the alpha male of this entire place. Fat Tinkerbell started to note truly how much all the other young dudes feared this RoboCop guy, and followed his every command to the dot. Oh man, that shit turned Fat Tinkerbell on. Fat Tinkerbell slowly became obsessed with RoboCop. Day in and day out, Fat Tinkerbell would take note of all these traits subconsciously, and she'd become impressed by him every time. While at home, she could not stop thinking about him. She would think about the RoboCop no matter what the situation or event. Slowly she began to fantasize about girly stuff like making out with him, holding him, and later, she'd fantasize about doing crazier things with the RoboCop. Like how anyone who has a crush on anyone would. But since this crush on RoboCop was of an extreme level, she would fantasize for hours on end, and fantasize about doing some of the most unbelievable of things with him. She would fantasize about stuff she wanted him to do to her. You know, since he is this strong alpha type of guy. Wink wink. She would put him in a role where he was still this strong, badass, alpha guy in her imagination. And this guy, this character would just take over Fat Tinkerbell's deepest of thoughts. Her nastiest of craziest of thoughts. Heart. Since she was now completely hypnotized by this man. This super deep voice, ass man. This giant hands, ass man. This thick black eyebrows, ass man. This large forearms and biceps, ass man. This wide shoulders, ass man. This action figure, ass man. This perfect jawline, ass man. This New York Boston accent, ass man. This young buck hunk, ass man. Fat Tinkerbell would now enjoy just how much RoboCop would follow her around at work. She would love how much he would show up out of nowhere to just look at her. Fat Tinkerbell being the shy, quiet, fat, ugly, single girl she's been all her life. She now had the hot guy, at work following her around all day. The one and only hottest guy in the entire maze of shops. Of course! Little red Fat Tinkerbell is gonna go crazy for him. Heart. It seemed like RoboCop didn't care about all the brats and Barbies inside the maze at all. This was because of how much he was following and focusing on Fat Tinkerbell day in and day out. Fat Tinkerbell was loving every second of it. The whole entire shift, he'd follow her. The whole 8 hours of work. She would no joke fantasize about him so much, to where she would have to excuse herself during work so that she can clean herself up in the bathroom. If you understand what I mean, wink wink. Keep in mind that Fat Tinkerbell is inexperienced. She was a grown 21-year-old woman who had never in her life experienced what most 21-year-olds had already experienced. It was a bit sad, to be honest. Now, even though she was now completely turned on by the RoboCop, completely hypnotized by the RoboCop, completely entranced and interested in him. In real life, she wouldn't display any interest on RoboCop. To RoboCop, Fat Tinkerbell would still behave with complete disinterest and hate toward both the two jerks. Fat Tinkerbell behaved indifferent around every guy in her job, showing no signs of interest towards anyone at all. She behaved with complete seriousness with every manager. With her coworkers she would behave friendly and interact more, but with her supervisors she would try to behave as professional as she possibly could. Because for one, She wouldn't trust any of them whatsoever as they're all males, and 2. She already experienced bullying from 3 of them. And 3. She was this employee that had little to no value and was considered a low value too, when it came to her looks and physical appearance. She really made it so that this enormous attraction she had for RoboCop was kept hidden away in the most secret area of her mind. She would remind herself about the way they behaved with her as soon as she stepped into that job in January. She would make sure to behave with complete indifference and show them both with her facial expressions and eye contact just how much she disliked them and the zero trust she had with them. She hoped to make them realize the type of bad people that they are, just with her attitude and her distance. Also, when Fat Tinkerbell began to lust for RoboCop, she was also now very nervous every single time he was around or near her. She was beyond nervous and embarrassed any and every time he was in sight. Fat Tinkerbell's heart would begin racing like if she was running, and she really wanted for her insane attraction on RoboCop to be unknown and never discovered. She hoped to never blush or become embarrassed. She hoped to never smile at RoboCop, not ever. Behaving as such or showcasing any of those actions would more than likely uncover her secret. RoboCop, either way, was still this bad, awful person that didn't deserve any of her affection and kindness. On top of all this, if it even became known of her interest in him, Fat Tinkerbell would become this laughingstock at the workplace. She'd become a joke because of how big she was, due to how unattractive she was, because of how sloppy she carried herself and how she looked. She truly was this basic too, when most girls are 8s or 10s inside the maze. Fat Tinkerbell would look like this one ugly, fat girl that was now crushing on the hot Brad Pitt guy that every girl likes. That would have also repelled and disgusted RoboCop himself. And that's the last thing Fat Tinkerbell would have wanted. It was just impossible for that secret to ever be unlocked by anyone ever. The following days, RoboCop would continue to follow Fat Tinkerbell all over the maze. She still didn't know if Harry Potter was in on it or not. Every time he would show up to look at her, she would give him the stank eye, she'd give him dirty looks. She would look at him all serious and like if she hates him. Mainly because of all the reasons, but overall, her secret crush on him. Heart. Because of how nervous and embarrassed he would make her feel, Fat Tinkerbell would now begin to do something new. Besides looking at RoboCop like she hates him with all those hate stares, she would now also turn the other way every time she saw him or every time he would show up. Soon, the whole following Fat Tinkerbell around the maze, the whole stalking and creeping up on Fat Tinkerbell thing, turned into this live game of hide and seek. LOL. Fat Tinkerbell was loving it. Heart. Fat Tinkerbell was loving every second of RoboCop following her, and her now running away from him. Her now hiding from RoboCop at every instance. So not only was Fat Tinkerbell giving him the hate stare and the leave me alone stare, she was literally now turning the other way and speed walking away from RoboCop in front of all the shoppers and people and coworkers. RoboCop being the nosy, bully jock, who's always looking and staring at her while making zero contact and zero interacting. He obviously began to notice this change. He would now begin to notice Fat Tinkerbell now dodging him at every location, at every point. At every intersection and every point of meet. It was honestly hilarious seeing this take place in real time. The customers didn't know what was happening. The co-workers didn't know what was happening. Only Fat Tinkerbell and RoboCop knew what was happening. And maybe both of them were enjoying it. Don't get me wrong. That must have looked ridiculous. LOL. However, without knowing that Fat Tinkerbell was into this guy and enjoying the literal chase. Literal cat and mouse chase. That almost looked like sexual harassment or some other form of harassment or bullying at work. It just looked like this one hot Brad Pitt, face-ass guy, following a fat blonde girl around this enormous maze, and the fat girl avoiding him at every point of meet. It was ridiculous. LOL. The RoboCop, as he noticed this change, he would simply continue to stare and keep quiet. Sometimes it appeared that he was too enjoying the whole literal cat and mouse game just as much. Since he is this one bully, jock, alpha, Chad type of guy. Sometimes it appeared that he was smiling as Fat Tinkerbell rushed the other way. Moving on, in this job, Fat Tinkerbell would have no choice but to meet with all the co-workers and her supervisors every hour so that they can all switch posts and keys with each other. At the end of every hour, it was switch time. And the supervisor, whether it be Angel Guy, Weed Guy, Boss Battle, or RoboCop, would either be in the office all day long, like a lazy loser, or be out and about in the maze. It really depended on what they were in the mood to do. Lucky for them, they got to do whatever the hell they wanted. Those managers really had pure freedom and free will at this job. They would make their own rules. They'd do what they please throughout the day. Sure, they did have it a little tougher compared to their employees, since they have manager duties and supervisor responsibilities. They had to do as King says, especially when he was around, before he left in the afternoon. However, when things were quiet and most things were taken care of, and King was gone, this maze was theirs to rule over. They'd be free as a bird. It really was a laid-back, chill job for everyone, including the employees themselves. But back to the story. Like I was saying, when it came to switch time with everybody, the supervisors would also go back to the tiny office to meet with everyone and make sure everyone is getting to their post. Those lazier supervisors would already be in there because they had never really left the office in the first place. LOL. Like Weed Guy or Angel Guy. Now, since we're talking about RoboCop here, allow me to tell you exactly how those switch times really were. Basically, this manly, soldier-looking, muscle boy, badass Brad Pitt, RoboCop there. He would call everyone to do the switch change after a long hour of following Fat Tinkerbell around the maze to see her 200-pound self as she ran away from him. Soon, as Fat Tinkerbell had no choice but to do as he says and meet up with everyone, including the RoboCop in that office. Fat Tinkerbell again felt this insane nervousness and heart-racing panic. She now has to meet up with her stalker there, her bully, her little crush there, RoboCop. Sometimes RoboCop would already be in there waiting for everyone, and other times he'd enter after everyone is already inside. He'd enter with his broad shoulders walk, his square jawline and charisma. Fat Tinkerbell would go in pure panic mode. She felt out of RoboCop's league, and she would feel like this fat ugly weird girl who had zero to no chance with him. Like she didn't deserve him. At that point, truly there was no avoiding the RoboCop when it came to these switch times. Fat Tinkerbell would literally have to come face to face with her fear. Her pure fear of RoboCop discovering her feelings or attraction to him. Fat Tinkerbell felt like he didn't deserve her, he deserved someone better. She at least wished for him to have met her in another reality where she was fit and slim. Not the whale he met her as she would go in there to exchange items with her buddies, and RoboCop would go in there as well. Fat Tinkerbell would not make any eye contact with RoboCop. She would completely not look at him. She would keep interactions short, respectful, and simple. She would still keep her hate stare and try to exit the room as fast as she possibly could. In fact, she actually didn't even make eye contact with RoboCop whatsoever. She completely avoided looking in his direction. She would talk with and look at anybody else in that room, except for him. Although, the truly funny thing is, compared to all the other co-workers that were in there, she would switch whatever with whoever. And she would rush the holy hell out of that office like a crazy person. Ha ha ha. Nobody else there would do that. That definitely made her look like a complete weird girl. That is how nervous and embarrassed RoboCop would make her feel. That must have looked hilarious, you guys. Well, moving on. That was basically how it was every single time that Fat Tinkerbell would work under RoboCop. When she worked under the Angel Guy, Weed Guy, or Boss Battle, it was always boring and chill. Nothing would ever happen at all. Working under any of them never felt as exciting, or frightening, or crazy. None of them gave her the chills and the heart-racing panic. None of them looked like boxer Brad Pitt who could knock you out with one hit. The other funny thing is, that RoboCop was also known by everyone to be this crazier type of guy. He would go out of his way to show off his manly, police-like abilities by calling the literal police or the literal fire department for any and every situation. It was almost every single time that Fat Tinkerbell would work with RoboCop that something would happen, and RoboCop would call his little co-worker buddies, the FBI, and the helicopters to take care of whatever situation. And Fat Tinkerbell would always hear about all those situations happening through the walkie-talkies. Ha 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 ha. Weed Guy, Angel Guy, nor Boss Battle even were out there doing any of that shit. Fat Tinkerbell would always hear RoboCop's manly, tough voice through the walkie-talkies every time she worked under him. RoboCop would never get off the walkie-talkies, never stop saying something through them. Fat Tinkerbell was enjoying and living every second of it. None of that would happen under any of the other bosses at all. RoboCop in every sense was really making that little dumb job into something fun and exciting all by himself, and all the other coworkers noticed that. In this little minimum wage, dead-end-ass job. Slowly RoboCop turned into this known, popular guy at the maze, if he wasn't already. It appeared that he was already known to be this one exciting hot guy by everyone who had already worked there for a while or over a year. However, the newer people who were new like Fat Tinkerbell herself, were now becoming aware of this. It seemed that Fat Tinkerbell alongside 4 other people had been hired for that year 2019, and some of the older people who were 50 and above. They had been there for 5 years already. They knew RoboCop better than anyone. They knew of his popularity, of his charisma, of his rugged soldierness and his antics. Well, as the days go on, and Fat Tinkerbell crushes on RoboCop as he mindlessly follows her through the maze day in and day out. After all of those things go down, the whole giving RoboCop a stank eye and turning the other way. The whole. What is your 20? The whole following, stalking, popping out of nowhere. The whole paper sheet that has everyone's post before they even start working. Just all of that. Fat Tinkerbell begins to notice something different, something that might have been there all along. She starts to notice that every time all the coworkers and bosses and shift supervisors were all united and crowded inside this one tiny office, inside this room. That basically, this RoboCop guy would stare at Fat Tinkerbell. He would stare like if he didn't care. RoboCop would stare at Fat Tinkerbell like if he meant to stare. When he stared at Fat Tinkerbell, it was a stare unlike anything. It was a complete full-on stare that would happen every single time, and as this office was crowded, with people in it. With those old grandpas and grandmas in there. It was as if he didn't mind whether the other guys and co-workers caught him staring at Fat Tinkerbell or not. It was as if he didn't give any damns or any shits. He was staring at that poor girl, and he was staring at her real good. Fat Tinkerbell would be this shy, quiet girl when the room was full of people. Surely other coworkers would be all reactive and friendly and talkative and full of life and personality. Fat Tinkerbell would not. She was more reserved, and because of her weight, her looks and her very low self-esteem, she tried her best to hide behind her phone as much as she could. Mostly when RoboCop was in the room for the most obvious reason. Fat Tinkerbell would make it so that she was the most invisible person in the room. She would turn to her phone, keep silent, and mostly stand or sit somewhere unnoticeable. If not, then she'd stand behind someone else. People would always talk and be friendly with one another, so it was very unlikely that any attention would go to Fat Tinkerbell. And let me tell you, that none of this stopped the RoboCop from staring at her. The staring from RoboCop would be very clear and very much alive. Fat Tinkerbell looked down at her phone every time she was in this room while RoboCop was also in this room. She would always wonder why this guy is staring at her long and hard every time he's in the same room as her. There was just no explanation. And of course this RoboCop guy would still have this frown-like face or stare or personality. He basically looked like if he was angry staring at her, or out of anger or dislike or hate. Sometimes he stared at her normal. Fat Tinkerbell begins to feel even more insecure because she had already gone through BS with that RoboCop jerk and the Harry Potter jerk a little while back from the previous stories. There was already a bad start in this boss to co-worker dynamic. Fat Tinkerbell had no idea what to make of the constant following, stalking, and now staring from this character. Clearly none of the other employees or supervisors ever noticed it. There was times that RoboCop's gaze was glued to Fat Tinkerbell across the room that other employees would have to snap him out of it. Another time, Fat Tinkerbell felt so insanely insecure from the long periods of staring that she looked back towards him in his eyeballs, no matter how much she wanted to hide her crush on him. And RoboCop then slowly turned to look somewhere else, with a weird smile on his face. By this time, it had already been 2 to 3 months. A lot of the new people that came in with Fat Tinkerbell had already gotten used to their bosses or supervisors, and had already begun a friendship or some sort of relationship or trust with their superiors. Fat Tinkerbell at the time might have already had some sort of trust with Angel Guy, and maybe some of the co-workers, but it wasn't a far stretch. She really was this one shy, insecure fat girl. Now, At the end of the day, why the hell would someone stare at someone for long periods of time and follow them to every single point in the map? And stalk them and pop out of nowhere without saying anything, without an explanation, without any prior talk or anything at all. Without a hi, or a bye, or a wave or a nod. Fat Tinkerbell and RoboCop were not friends, they were not buddies. They were complete strangers. RoboCop never had initiated a conversation with Fat Tinkerbell. So even worse. Fat Tinkerbell was not about to initiate a conversation with RoboCop, her crush, the hot guy. The Brad Pitt in there. The mean guy, the guy that probably can't stand her, probably wants to get rid of her. Fat Tinkerbell in the end was just really trying to secure her job and possibly keep happy at the thought that maybe, somehow, someday the RoboCop likes her back. Even though he truly doesn't or never will. Fat Tinkerbell already had a bad rap of not keeping a long-term job, of getting fired from jobs, of quitting jobs. She at that point just wanted something that can stick and something she can learn from. She hoped to be able to keep this job, and she hoped to defeat all her enemies, or at least not allow them to harass her and mistreat her. Those who were considered her enemies were the Harry Potter, the weed guy, and the RoboCop himself. She had to keep in mind and not forget their actions, no matter how much she now was interested in this guy. Insanely attracted and interested in this guy. Well, that was the story of the little crush. The next part gets crazier and crazier. These little stories like the write-up, the lost phone, and the creepy stalker are only scratching the surface of what is really to come. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and please let me know down below if you've ever experienced anything like this from a hot guy, alpha guy, chat at work. Or talk about if you've seen behavior like that from anyone in your life. If you've ever crushed on your boss or your bully. Just leave your thoughts on this whole situation in the comments. You can find me on my second YouTube, EmyyWolf Productions. You can find me on BitChute under my same username, EmyyWolf. You can find me on DeviantArt under the same username, EmyyWolf. You can find me on Facebook also at EmyyWolf. All other links are down below. And have a wonderful day.